Good evening from Singapore, and to those joining us from elsewhere around the world, greetings. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this session on building bridges, translating Chinese literary masterpieces into Tamil, organized by the Singapore Center for Tamil Culture, with support from the Singapore National Library Board and the National Council of the Arts. I'm reminded that one of the more popular attributions of the phrase, "May you live in interesting times," is to say that this phrase is from an ancient Chinese curse. Now, Google tells you that this phrase is neither Chinese nor it is ancient, but it's probably attributable to a politician from the 1930s. Regardless of its provenance, the phrase rings true to our times as never before. The explosive growth of information communications technologies and the massive migration online that took place during the recent pandemic has caused our political, social, cultural, and religious worlds to increasingly overlap and sometimes jostle against each other. Many people living today inhabit many different culture spaces, both physically and online. And those of us who are not digital natives are sometimes still searching for our passports to this brand new digital world. In an increasingly interconnected world, language and its translation become increasingly important. Translation provides the glue that holds the multiple worlds that we inhabit together. It provides a medium for communication and understanding. It builds bridges. However, the work of translation is fraught with challenges, difficulties, and dangers. No language in the world is so pliable that it can be perfectly expressed in another. This is especially so for Mandarin and Tamil, two of the many ancient languages in Asia. The nuances and intricacies of each have been colored by millennia of social and aesthetic development, a long and colored history, and a rich canon of literature. Today's session will talk about translating Chinese literary masterpieces to Tamil. Our speaker today is well placed to speak about this work. Mr. Dharan Madhusudanan, who writes with the pen name Payani Dharan, or Travelly Dharan in English, belongs to the Indian Foreign Service. He has served about 14 years in Chinese-speaking areas, including Beijing, Hong Kong, and Taipei. He also served in the Pacific and the US. Apart from an MBA from Colorado State University, USA, and studying Chinese language at the Beijing Institute of Economic Management, Dharan has 3 separate postgraduate qualifications in human resource management, public administration, and journalism. Dharan has also written 3 books: An Introduction to the Chinese Language in Tamil, a second book, which is an introduction and select translation of Searching, the Book of Songs, the first ever direct translation between Tamil and Chinese, and thirdly, a translation of Nobel Prize winner Mo Yan's novella, Change. He is a recipient of the Sparrow Literary Award for Translation in 2016. He has published journal articles on lexicography, ecology, and literature. And joining us as a discussant today is Mr. Ravi Sharma. Ravi arrived in Beijing in 1959 together with his parents. His mother was the first person who introduced the Tamil language in China and started teaching Tamil language in Beijing at the Beijing Radio Institute, which is now called the China Media University, from 1960 till 1966. All his school years were spent in China. He then learned Tamil. He got a job doing translation in a radio station till 1981, where he mainly translated Mandarin to Tamil. He's now involved in business together with his Chinese friends. And just as a bit of extra information about Mr. Ravi Sharma, his grandfather was the one who established the Anglo Vernacular School in Singapore in 1922, and this school ran till the 1960s. His father, Mr. P.V. Sharma, who graduated from Raffles College in 1940, was the founder of the STU, the Singapore Teachers Union. And in China, Mr. P.V. Sharma worked as an English language editor for Xinhua News Agency. You'll agree with me that both these gentlemen are eminently qualified to speak about translating Mandarin literary texts to Tamil. And I propose that we could hear from Dharan first, and then invite Ravi and the others here today to join us for a discussion after that. And so without further ado, Dharan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Siddharaj, for that wonderful, flawless, fluent, and generous introduction. I'm very glad to have this opportunity, and I'm very grateful for this platform. Just imagine talking in English about two of the oldest languages in the world. That talk also includes a first ever direct translation done between them. As Siddharaj said, I think we are living in interesting times. So I am very happy that all of you have taken your time to come here. Let me share the screen for you to get a glimpse of what I'm going to say. I would be switching off the screen on and off. I thought that it's mainly to give you a pitch of what I'm going to talk about, and after that, we will interact directly. So today's topic is translating Chinese literary masterpieces into Tamil and building bridges. Building bridges is a life concept for me. I don't just mean translation. I feel that any innovation is a result of a bridge. Somewhere somebody takes a new information and that becomes an innovation. Somebody mixes something and that happens. For all these confluences to happen, you should have bridges. And translation is literally, consciously a bridge. That is why this title has been chosen by the organizers, and I was very glad that we are having this. Okay, let me say this. In 2012, if you see on the screen, I have slightly zoomed this Chinese web search. On that day, Shiqing is the name of the book. If you can read the Chinese, you will see that it's Shiqing in quotes. So if you search Shiqing, and you will actually find about 383 Chinese media newspapers were carrying news about this book. And then on the right, you see a Singapore magazine. And then on the left, you see an English language magazine in China. And then at the bottom, you see the Hindu, which has English. And then there were many, many more Tamil articles also. So when a literary translation becomes an international news, something is very unusual about it. What was unusual? I'm going to stop share here. What was unusual about this 2012 is this was the first ever direct translation between Chinese language to Tamil language. Did it happen overnight? Was it planned to be 2012? No, it has a longish history. I'm an Indian Foreign Service officer. When you join Indian Foreign Service, you go to a country to learn a compulsory foreign language. And I chose Chinese as my compulsory foreign language. We call it CFL. And Chinese is my CFL. So I went to Beijing in late 90s, 98 or so. And then I learned Chinese language. When I started learning Chinese language, I found that the whole process of learning Chinese language was interesting, apart from learning Chinese language. So I have filled notebooks with my notes about some insights about Chinese language, some class jokes, or some goof-ups. I mean, anybody learning new language will make some goof-ups. So I made all these notes so that it will give me a sort of diary. But ultimately what happened, apart from diary, it turned out into a book, first book, Chinese language and introduction. This was a first book. It is in a way me retelling my learning or from my classroom notes, how I saw. This is actually in Tamil. This is again a first book ever written in Tamil about a Chinese language. In this book, I have given how does Chinese language look, what it is, why it sounds like this, all those elements I've covered. More importantly, for this august audience, I want to underline the transliteration part of it. If any of you know Chinese, today, let me say this out loud. Today, I'm given to understand that my audience is mixed one, where some Chinese knowing, of course, all of us speak English. That's a commonality. There are some people who know English and Chinese. There are some people who know Tamil and English. Probably very few people like Ravi will know English, Tamil, and Chinese. Right? So with that understanding, I'm slightly expanding this language part of it. So if you know Chinese, the way you type it out on the keyboard or the way you look for a Chinese word in a Chinese dictionary is based on pinyin. Pinyin is a literary transliteration standard. It actually is a standard approved by the United Nations. There is a committee on standards, which goes into any standard, any standard, meter, inches, everything goes there. There is a standard book, standard committee. That standard committee also has some subgroups, and one subgroup is about languages. And in the language subgroup, this pinyin system of how to get Chinese sounds with Roman, that's pinyin. Formulator of pinyin, he died recently, an old gentleman. So this standard has transformed how Chinese is used around the world. Now, in 20 years ago, I tried something and I said, okay, how to bring the Chinese sounds in by Tamil scripts. Okay, it was an amazing journey. I was very happy that I could get it. There are many rules about transliteration. There is something called basic thing is about reversibility. When you come from, say, Chinese sound to Tamil sound, from the Tamil sound, you should be able to go back to the Chinese sound without any confusion. There should be one-to-one correlation about the sounds when the phonemes are coming here. So it's a bit technical, complex, but amazing area. So I did that in the first book. The second book is when the 2012 news came. The second book is a translation of Shiqing, Book of Songs. I will come to the Book of Songs a bit more elaborate after a few minutes. And that was the second book. The connection is why in Tamil Nadu many people are excited about it, because I found that it is almost like a Sangam literature of Tamil. So the problem is the only Chinese English knowing audience will not know what is Sangam literature. Only Tamil and English knowing audience will not know what is here, and I can see here, but not many people can see these two. Right? So that is the second book. And this book is not just a translation. This book has a lot of poems in the beginning, but it has very substantial essays in the back. I introduce the book. I tell the history of the book. In another essay, I talk about the importance of the book. And then I come to the translation part of it. So it's a very elaborate essays at the back, but to the front, this, which is Matram. Matram is a translation of Bianhua. Bianhua in Chinese means change, written by Mo Yan, who is a Nobel Laureate from China. This is a novella. People are still debating whether it's an autobiography or it's a novella. It's an autobiographical novella, is how I will put it. Right. So this is the third book. And the fourth book is free download, which is called 21 Sentences to Kickstart Your Chinese Learning. It's in Tamil. Okay, if you want to learn Chinese from English, there are n number of books. This is mainly for the Tamil audience. The reason why I elaborate this is that I'm actually doing a lot of things in the linguistic part. Have been captured in my second book, and there will be some more thing coming up this year. So I work with Chinese language from the linguistic perspective, language perspective, literature perspective, and the translation perspective. So I have multifaceted approach to Chinese language. Let me briefly touch upon this. I'm a fan of demystifying art. Okay, major artists around the world over the ages have said this. Still, a common man feels art is a mystery. Art is a magic, a God-given, some blessing. Nothing. I'm a fan of demystifying art. Art is Not 1 + 1 is 2, but it is not something that some blue light comes to you one day and you start writing poem. No, anybody can become an artist. Anybody can become a translator. Anybody can write poems. So this is demystifying how I did this translation. Okay, briefly. See, when I stumbled upon Shriching, there was an English translation of Shriching poem. I thought it's the English translation of a Tamil poem from Sangam time. So I contested and I asked people around. Everybody said, no, it's not an Indian poem. I said, no, this is Indian poem. It's from my Muyu, my mother tongue. I said, no, it's not. And after that, I went to my teachers where I was learning Chinese language. And then they said, no, it's a Chinese classic called Shiqing. For the Tamil audience, Shi means poetry, Ching means collection. It's like our Agananuru or Purananuru. And I also like Kali Togai, right? So it's Kalipa Togai. So it's a combination of songs. So I use that. And so my Tamil book on Shriching is called Kavi Togai. Kavi Togai. It captures the sort of Sangam mode there, right? So I didn't really want to translate it. I wanted to learn it first. But once I went through, I got a few books and I went through, I found that, okay, why don't we do what I did for the language? Let's start taking notes. When I started taking notes, I got really interested. Then I went to some teachers, used some influences. I went to the head of the Department of Chinese Language and Literature in Peking University, Chi Lao Shi, and almost prostrated in front of him saying that I normally say that my Tamil plate is broken, my Chinese cup is broken, right? So I'm trying to translate from this broken Chinese cup to my broken Tamil plate, but you need to help me. This is a civilizational bridge. We are bridging two civilizations, two of the ancient civilizations in the world, right? So it's a very important work. So you need to help. So this is Chi Lao Shi. His English is how are you? Hello. That's it. So he will speak in Chinese, and my Chinese is very bad. So I went to another Lao Shi, Chang Lao Shi, who used to teach English to Chinese students and Chinese to non-Chinese students. So her English was better. She has learned Chinese literature, but she's not a teacher of Chinese literature. So I went to her saying that, okay, Chi Lao Shi is going to teach something. Will you teach that in English too? Reteach it so that I can reinforce any clarification I can ask you more openly and you can clarify. And she's a bit computer savvy also. So she will open her laptop and search for a particular animal or a particular plant. She can give me all this information. So that is how I learned Shriching, almost about 100 songs, I would say, for 2 years through private tuition. After that, as Situraj said, there is something called China Radio International. China Radio International trains its Chinese employees or prospective employees in a university where they teach many world languages and they have one Tamil language department. So there are Chinese who were learning Tamil language. I caught hold of them. In China Radio International, there are Tamilians who translate English into Tamil or Chinese into Tamil. Chinese into Tamil is very rare now only, but earlier it used to be mainly English into Tamil. And that is what is read by the Tamil speaking Chinese readers. It's a very complex thing. So I got hold of the Tamilians who work there. Then we got people from Hong Kong, Singapore, who are all friends. And then we sent emails to them saying that this is what the project is. So you give your feedback about the songs. So this went on almost for about 7 years. Consistently, 7 years, we have been working on and off on this book. Whenever I come to India, I used to work with my friends and sit with them. Okay, these are the collections. Let's discuss about it. So it took 7 years, and when I was posted to Delhi in 2010, 11, so 2012 we released the book. That is when it becomes an international news because we didn't know that this is the first ever direct translation in Chinese to Tamil. I totally didn't even think that it could be. I thought there would be some compendium of work, and I'm adding to it. When it transpired that this is the first book, then it became more tricky for me because I have been cooking up my translation process. I've been making notes about my translation process. Then I realized, no, I have to register this. So that is why this book has a substantial work on how I translated, what concepts I use to translate. Everything is I've written. It is not a magic. It's a demystified art. Okay, that is the main part I want to give. And also about the book, the layout, just a word. I'll finish about the book here. If you see, the book will have a very Chinese look. I actually had about 50 to 60 books as models. I used to go to uh, a shop in Wangfuchin, I think. So there will be a lot of books, and I'll collect a lot of Chinese books, irrespective of the subject. If the look is very good, if the book looks very nice, I'll buy it. And then I was inspired by all these elements, and then I designed these books. So this book designed in Adobe InDesign. So I learned Adobe InDesign to design this book. And after I learned Adobe InDesign, still Adobe InDesign has a lot of problems with Tamil fonts. I'm talking of almost 10, 15 years ago. So it was a difficult period to learn about the technology, learn about designing, and then translating, and then working out. But it was an accelerating experience. All said and done, I'm very happy. Okay. Today, we are actually going to talk about just these two books. Okay. And these two books, briefly, I'll stop the screen here. These two books, briefly, they cover a broad spectrum, one on this side, one on this side. Right? If you take Shiching, the Book of Songs, this, when I translate it, I have to remind that this has to have an old feeling for a modern Tamil reader. So I have to keep the modern Tamil reader as my target, but I should not make it a modern book. That was a trick. So I have to attain these two. Second one is I have to use modern Tamil terminology so that the Tamil audience do not feel as if they are reading some Sangam poem. It has to have the aesthetics of Sangam poem, but not the terminology of Sangam poem. My selection was mainly to provide a glimpse of Shiching. Shiching, if you go to Wangfuchin or any other bookshop you go, there will be walls and walls of books on Shiching. In China, probably it's like in Tirukural in Tamil. You go to any publication, they will have one Shiching book. They have been reiterating, reinterpreting this book over the centuries, over the millennia. So it's huge. So these are the elements about Shiching. Now this Matram Bien Hua is by Moyan, who is a contemporary author, a vast work compendium of work he has, novellas and novels and movies. Red Sorghum novel became a movie by Chan Yimou. So this is a very modern work, but it still captures from his 70s or late 60s and his life to the late 90s. What happens in a very small way. It's about 100 pages, I would think. Yeah, about 100 pages, less than 100 pages. It's a vast swath of history captured through a primary school crush. There is a girl in his class, and then there is a boy in his class. This is triangle. What happens in their lives for the last, say, 40 years? Amazing way of capturing an autobiography. But this book is entirely different from Shiching. This is a very chatty, modern book. And Shiching is pre-Confucius. So you are looking at two extremes of a spectrum, right? Let me talk about these two extremes and how I handle so that we'll get some idea of the translation part. Okay, let me just go to the next one. On the screen, I'm now going to show a quote. This is by Confucius to give you a pitching of where we are. Confucius talks about Shiching, Book of Songs, by saying that if you don't read the poems of Shiching, you are like somebody who is standing not facing the room, but facing the wall. You're missing the world if you don't read Shiching. This is what Confucius says, right? Confucius is Buddha's contemporary. So during Confucius period, this book has gained so much importance that Confucius says that if you don't read this book, you will not understand the world. This book is that famous 2,500 years ago. Even today, even today. Okay, so that is the book we are talking about. Okay, let me briefly touch about how I selected the poems. Okay, see, as I said, I didn't know that I am the first direct translator between these two languages, but I knew that probably I'm the first one who is touching this book into Tamil. So I had two approaches. One is to do justice to the original book or do justice to my new audience, new readers. I went for the later. I selected poems which will make sense to the reader, Tamil reader. My idea is to open a window, give a glimpse of what this book is about. So I took poems which will have a poetic approach commonality. If you are a trilingual, you will understand what I'm talking about. But at least even if you know Tamil, any Sangam literature will have a very strong Sangam literature approach because it's a selection. People wouldn't have selected it unless they can tick a lot of boxes. It has to be crisp, it has to be tight, it has to be poetic, it has to be fluid. There are many, many rules that play into this. So Shriching also has many songs which are like this, some songs which are not like this. So I left the songs which are not like this. I just went for the songs which are like this. So that is one approach I chose. Second is there is a literary tradition in Tamil. For the non-Tamil audience, there is something called Thinai, which is a sort of grouping, I would say, a segment. Thinai comes from a very strong psychological feeling. What feeling will shine under what circumstances? For example, there is a feeling of despair. There is a feeling of hope. Where to give? Can you give hope in the middle of a green paddy field? No. You give it on the seashore of an ocean. Even your cry is drowned by the waves. The wind is blowing. It is so dark. You don't know whether whoever went away from you will ever come back. Is there a hope there? No, it's despair. So cry on the seafront. If you are very hopeful life, say a farmer's morning, of course, the cows go, the buffaloes go. Evening, they come back. The hens go, they come back. The rooster goes, they come back. So every day there is a going and coming back, which is assured. In the seafront, it is not assured. So Tamil literature and grammar captures this ecology, which is most suited for a particular field. For example, sex, intercourse. You have to do it in a forest area on the mountain. Why? Mystery, new, discovery. Right? So there are a lot of elements they have thought through, and then they have put these things together. What I found when I approached Shriching, this is mind-blowing, without this Tamil codification, many of the Shriching songs capture these elements. This is not, I don't want to mystify. It's not a mystery. People over the centuries, they know that some feelings come out better. You take any movies, Tamil movie or Hindi movie or any world movie, when the heroine is crying, probably she's on the seafront. Yeah. When the duet is happening, there is a green field behind them. I don't think that Indian film directors will go through Thinai to decide where to put the scene. They know that this is where it works well. You take any Akira Kurosawa movie, most of the sex scenes are in the forest. Why it happens? That is how it works. So that is the commonality. So I took this thing. And also in content also, I took the content which will be easy to understand, not needing a lot of historical descriptions about things. Right? Shriching is embedded, enriched with so many historical clues and hints. I didn't want to drag my Tamil audience to learn about history so that they can understand the poem. I left those. So this is a very conscious selection of which songs come in, which songs do not come. Why I did direct translation? One is I believe, I will expand this in the later part of it. I believe translations are impossible, but they are necessary. So it's impossible necessity. That is why translations are. And every translation is bloody. When I translate Shriching, I murder it in Tamil. If somebody from Tamil takes it to, say, Telugu, they will murder it again from Tamil to Telugu. So, via English will be a double murder. I at least preferred a direct single murder. That is how the sanction comes. This is a direct translation. And some of the things will be lost when you take from one culture to another culture. For example, some of the Chinese cultural elements, say a sneeze. In Chinese culture also, it is when somebody sneezes, they believe that somebody dear to you is thinking about it. You take Tirukural. There are so many poems in one Kural. He says that I was about to sneeze and my lover is next to me. If I sneeze, she'll be upset that I'm here and somebody is thinking about you and you're sneezing. So I tried to hide my sneeze and she found it. And she says that, you're trying to hide somebody. Right? So this is a very easily capturable cultural element. But when you take it to English, where they do not have this cultural context, probably this nuance will be missed. And if I take it from English, I won't even know that the original Chinese said this. Or it will be in a very freckle way, not with the pithy thing we can bring it in. So my selection was here. Finally, a word, this is because I'm encouraged by the Chinese knowing audience here. In Chinese, counting would be E, R, San, Su. When you say Wu, when you write Wu, in one of the poems where it's a slightly incestuous situation, whereas there is a king and his sister, and they have some relationship, and the sister is married to a neighborhood kingdom, but still this elder brother is having some relationship with the sister. So the village people are singing these songs, sort of censuring him, saying, this is not proper. It should be proper. For proper, they give a lot of definitions. They say that when you plow the land, you plow properly. You don't do crisscrossing things. You plow like this. And when you plant the seeds, you plant them properly. You don't just plant here and there. Of course, everywhere the crop will come, but it's improper. You don't do. And in the long run, it will not sustain. In between, in the poem, they say that a pair of shoes, the Chinese velvet shoes. So they say a pair of shoes, but it says 5 number of shoes. And you take any English book, say this is also one of the very famous English translations by Arthur Valley, and you take the poem, it will say 5 shoes. When I was learning from my teachers, I said, why 5 shoes? It doesn't, everything else makes sense to me, but what is this 5 shoes? And when I showed it to my Chinese teachers, they said, where is 5? It's 2. No, it's written. So no. Wu became 5 later. In those times, Wu also means 2. So they're saying a pair of shoes. There should be 2 people in the relationship. Don't add a third one or don't add a fourth. It's 2 people, right? So that is what the village. Then everything becomes very clear. But you take any English translation. I haven't at least seen any English translation which correctly captures this. So a mistake taken to another language can be transferred to another language because it will perpetuate. So these are the advantages and why I wanted to do direct translation. Okay. So now, Shriching as a book is a very complex book. As I said, Confucius propagated it as the life philosophy. Many of the Confucius philosophy and the later is five classics, everything flows from this areas. It becomes a huge influence on the Chinese philosophy. Later, kingdoms started fighting over it. They wrote different interpretation of Shriching, and the previous interpretations were burnt, purposefully collected and burnt in the city hall. So it's a very political book. And when many of you know that China is one of the first countries which invented the civil service exams, and Shriching was very much part of the civil service exam. If you don't know Shriching, you cannot pass and become a Mandarin, which is interestingly the Chinese language Mandarin. If you ask even Chinese knowing people what is Mandarin, they will say Mandarin. But I recently read an interesting angle that Mandarin is a Portuguese word given to Chinese bureaucracy or important people like ministers. So why Portuguese language will call a Chinese bureaucrats or ministers as Mandarin? Because Portuguese are coming via Malaysia, Singapore, that area. And they brought this word for Mandarin to the Chinese ministers. So within China, there is no word called Mandarin. There is no root for Chinese in Mandarin. So why it is Mandarin? The language spoken by the ministers. But why ministers are called Mandarin? Then it turns out that in the this Malaysia, this area, they used to call it Mandarin. Mandarin in Mandiri in Tamil is minister, right? So Mandiri, Mandarin, Mandarin, Mandarin. Very interesting connection. Okay. So what I did, I didn't want to go into the history part of it. I said, okay, I'm introducing a literature to the Tamil audience. So I dropped all the historical angles. Of course, one essay captures this history, but I mainly focused on the poetry first approach. So I took poetry for the beauty of it. I dropped all other paraphernalia around it. The result is that my selection is very poetic in approach. I'm not trying to establish anything. I'm just trying to go into a very poetic area. Here, if you see on the right, I've given now the second edition of Trichin Kavitogai. We have given Chinese and Tamil side by side. This is Chinese, this is Tamil. This is again probably first in the world. And on the screen, you will see that there is a poem which talks about how happy a tree is. Okay, this is 2,500, 600 years ago. Somebody is looking at a tree and says, "How happy this tree is! If only I can be as happy." Right? That is what he quotes. And in that, I've taken this poetic approach, and I've also taken the meter of the Chinese song. If you see, there are 4 characters, 4 characters, 4 characters, 5 characters. Each stanza is consisted of 21 characters. So 4, 4, 4, 5. 4, 4, 4, 5. That is how it goes. So in Tamil also, I've broken it into 4, 4, 4, 5. It's not necessary, but I felt creative constraint will push me, and it really literally pushed me. So I have to get the sound, I have to get the meter, I have to get the meaning, I have to make it palatable to a Tamil audience. A lot of juggling going on here, but that's what made it very interesting. Okay. Now there are 2 books. The second book is not with me, but I showed you this book. Another book is in my shelf. It's okay. See, one book is by Author Valley, another is by Ezra. Both of them have translated Shichi. When you say a good translation, what it means? If you read Ezra Pound poems, they're excellent poems, but you can hardly go back to the Chinese origin. When you read his poems, they stand alone as a very good English poems, but are they honestly reflecting what the original Chinese said? No. If you are interested in a discourse, you should search for Ezra Pound's teacher, Penalosa. And there is a beautiful, beautiful essay by a Chinese called Mr. Kennedy Wong. I'm forgetting his name. But Kennedy, you search Kennedy Penalosa, you'll get it. So Kennedy has written a very nice article or essay about Penalosa's approach and Ezra Pound, who is his student, how they approach Chinese language. This is a good lesson for any translator. Say I'm translating something from Spanish. How should I approach Spanish language? Kennedy says you should approach with humility. Don't approach with hubris. What happens when you approach with hubris? You will feel the Chinese did not understand the Chinese language well, I'm going to teach them how it is. Some of the approaches of Penalosa, the way he describes Chinese language, is that there is a particular phrase where he says that even though Chinese language, all the characters emerge from action, verb, not many Chinese people are conscious of it. Right? This is very condescending. It is not the way the language works. The language is residing in the heart of the people who speak. They are the temple of the language. There is no other better temple than a practitioner for a language. You can't ridicule them. So in that way, this is a very important topic for any translator group, that which is a good translation is not decided by the end product, also by the connection to the original. If it is bereft of connection to the original and the end project is very good, it is a good poetry or a good piece of literature, but it is not a good translation. So the loyalty, the faithfulness, the honesty to the original is a very important element for any translator. That's a major point I wanted to make. Okay, now we are coming to the second part. We are on the almost 25% of my speech left over. Now we are coming to Matram, which is change, Bien Hua. Bien Hua is, as I said, it's a modern literature. And if you see the photo, it's a childhood memoir. It starts from a primary school where there is a backbench student who starts saying the story to us. And it's a very, very modern literature in terms of how it approaches history, how it approaches change, how it approaches love, how it approaches teachers, how it approaches education. There is one scene where a sort of so-called rowdy student is sent out of the school, and this storyteller is looking at him. It's an evening. This rowdy boy, so-called rowdy boy, is going, and suddenly he realizes what's happening. What is happening is this rowdy boy is dropping something from his hand like this and walking into the sun. What he is dropping, pages from his textbook. Right? He store this and dropping and walking away. Right? These are amazing images captured in this book. Right? It's a very small book, but it is not without reason that Moyan is a Nobel laureate. Right? So when I translated it, I was conscious of who is Moyan? What is his work? If you read his another major work, Big Breasts and Wide Hips. The title is slightly scintillating, but it's a very big swath of history and transformation in Chinese civilization. And it's a huge volume. And nowhere you will find anything similar to the small book Bien Hua handles. At the same time, there is another book, Shifu. I've kept it somewhere. So, Shifu, you will do anything for a laugh. There is another Chinese language book by Moyan. That's very chatty. That's like Bien Hua. So, Moyan has different styles, and I knew that this style has to come here. So, I translated this book with this consciousness that there is no generic Moyan language. It is Bien Hua language, Matram language. You have to bring it in. And I've connected this old to new. And so this next screen, for the Tamil audience, it will be understandable, but for the English audience, just let me explain. At the bottom, you see two Chinese sentences. Okay. And I've highlighted Song Xiao, right? Wo Chai Ren Song Xiao Jiu Tian. Wo Chai Ren Song Xiao Jiu Tian. He says there are three characteristics. He says, I was very naughty, I was a loser, I was this. He could have said it in two ways. One is he can say, from childhood, I was naughty, loser, this. Or he can say, from childhood, I was naughty. From childhood, I was a loser. From childhood, I was a trouble attractor. What Moyan does, Moyan chooses the later. He's not a normal author. It's a very conscious choice he makes that I don't want the sentence to be crisp. I want it to be chatty, as if you're sitting with somebody on a train or Kinnai in Tamil. You are sitting somewhere and you're chatting with somebody, you have to bring that feeling. So he's using a very chatty language. So I use the same in Tamil. But in Tamil, now the Tamil audience will know there is a huge gap between written Tamil and the spoken Tamil. Huge gap. It's almost disconnected. I tried to make the written language so mild. Actually, I completely translated the whole book and then made someone read for me a couple of chapters. And I decided that I am not doing just to Moya. So I went back and then rewrote the whole book again in spoken Tamil language. And then now, when you read this translation, you will feel that, okay, somebody is chatting with you. That is very important. So that is a point about translation. Now I'm coming to the concluding part of my speech. There are two areas I want to say that I have to answer. Any creative person, if you're a poet or if you're an author, if you're a theater person, if you're a cinematographer, there will be moments where there will be a huge, huge question of self-doubt. Are you faking it? Who are you? Who are you to write a poem? What do you know about the word? Why are you writing it? This is self-doubt. Right? The self-doubt will come to translators often because almost no translator will have equal dexterity about both the languages. There will be origin language and there is a destination language. The recipient language normally has to be stronger. For example, my Tamil is stronger than my Chinese. Even though both are broken, my broken Tamil plate is slightly in a better condition than my broken Chinese cup. So the recipient language has to be stronger. Still, you will have moments of doubt. Especially imagine a person who is doing this first ever in the history of humanity. Who am I? Right? My Chinese is so bad and my Tamil is also bad. And who am I doing this? So this is not something that I'm saying this for this talk. This is written in Tamil, and I received an award by Sparrow for literature online. This is my approach. I'm saying that I agree that my Chinese is bad. I agree my Tamil is not very good. I want to be a sort of martyr, so to say, that I want to start. I think it's a shame that we haven't done this before. We should start. There are so many people who can learn this and they can bring this. So if there is an evolution of Chinese to Tamil translation, I could be an amoeba or a water organism. Okay, you push it to any level, probably I'm an ape. Okay, I'm no more than an ape. And I accept that I can be an ape. I'm willing to be an ape. Unless the ape comes in 2012, in 2020, 22, a more evolved human being will not come. Now we are talking 2020, 22, but we haven't seen many works coming up. I wish very soon my book will be ridiculed for its translation standard. Somebody should junk it into dustbin and say that, okay, here is a better translation of Shri. As a translator, that is my wish, that my book should be trashed as soon as possible. With this consciousness, I did this translation. There will be a lot of problems. All the problems are because of me, despite my teacher's best efforts, despite my associates' best efforts, my friends' best efforts. I would have goofed up spectacularly in this, but it's okay. That is how we have to start. So this is my approach to Shri mainly. But when I come to the next slide, which is overall, I do a lot of translations via English also. I've translated a few poems of Japanese via, I don't know Japanese, so I've translated some of the poems via English. And I know what problem. I said it's a double murder, right? Somebody murdered Japanese poems into English. I murdered the English poems into Tamil. I'm conscious about it. Now I have this approach to translation overall. Okay, there are 4 elements. One is, as I said, it's impossible to translate. As famously said in English, there are no synonyms in a language. Even in the same language, no 2 words can have the same meaning. They can have related meaning. They cannot have the same meaning. If there is no synonym in the same language, how can there be synonym in another language? Why? If you see linguistically how a word emerges, I've actually given a speech for about 45 minutes or 1 hour about how to enjoy words being there in a language. It's called the Sol Rasanai. I just spoke about how you can enjoy a word being there in a language. Right? I can go deeply into it in some other occasion. So every word available in language is a beautiful, beautiful civilizational evolution. Each word is capturing something about that society. And then you are trying to take it to another language which evolved by their evolutionary process and their cultural ethos. So now you are trying to connect. It's impossible to do, but the second point, it is essential. As the title of this talk says, these are bridges. We have to build a bridge. We have to understand each other. We have to try to reach out. That is why translations are very important. But we have to do it with the consciousness that it's impossible. I'm trying. It's like I'm a theater person. It's like ever going rehearsal without a performance. It's always a rehearsal. Every translation will always be a rehearsal, never a performance. It's okay. Rehearsal, they have their own beauty, their own ethos. We should capture it. A third one is that it's a fine art. It's not a rough one. It's not a Google translation, or it's not that I know this word and I will do this. A same word in different contexts, even in Tamil or any language, a word gets its meaning by its company in a sentence. That sentence gets a meaning by the paragraph. The paragraph gets a meaning by the particular page. So even a word within a language is contextual. And now you are taking it to another area, it's a very contextual. So somebody was asking me, do you do word by word translation? I said, no, you cannot do. It's always contextual. It's always contextual. But it's so that's why most of the translation work is so it's a mental work and then probably some typing, but it is not typing. Right? So a lot of mental work, revise. Now, if there are any aspiring translators or my co-translators, my personal pitch about this is that translation is a skill and you can be trained to translate. We do interpretation, translation in an official way, but that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a literary translation. Literary translation can be taught. It's an art, but it can be taught. On the Facebook, put it on your blog, put it on your newsletter, say that, this is an attempt and this is how I translated. Always give the original. People will give you some suggestion. This word is better. In this poem, this author has used this word as this. So go for it. Okay, build in public. And openly collaborate. You can say that, okay, this lady gave me this information, this gentleman told me this, so I'm adopting it. So I'm not saying that this is 100% original, but it's okay. We have come to this and we are fine with this. Right? So this is my approach to translation, and all my work so far have been guided by this. This is how I approach my life. This is how I approach my literature. This is how I approach my translation also. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. It's an amazing session. Thank you all. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharan. That was a fascinating presentation of your pioneering journey of translating Chinese texts into Tamil. Being involved in the Tamil literary milieu myself, I know just how pioneering your work is. And as a topical reference, I could not help being reminded of the 7th century Chinese Buddhist monk and scholar Xuanzang's, I'm murdering the name since everybody's using the word murder, arduous journey to India between 629 and 645 of the Common Era, and the difficulties he underwent to translate Buddhist texts into Chinese. Of course, we know that his scholarship had a profound impact on East Asian Buddhism through his translation of the ancient Yogacara texts. So translations can certainly have a profound impact and certainly can build bridges. Also, translators themselves can inspire works of fiction, as Xuanzang's inspired figure of the hero of the journey to the West. And yes, as you said, a translation is frequently the result of a supportive ecosystem. If it takes a village to raise a child, then it takes a village to also support the work of translation. Ravi, you have a fascinating biography. You spent your formative years in China. You learned to speak Mandarin there. And this was during some of the most turbulent years in the modern history of the country. And then you learned Tamil and you worked for a radio station translating Mandarin to Tamil. Translating for the radio is, of course, very different from translating literary texts. Tell me, what were some of the greatest challenges that you faced in translating Mandarin text to Tamil for the radio, and how did you overcome them? I suppose translating technical terms was a big headache. Ravi.
Thank you very much for introduction. 首先呢，我想向斯利达人老师表示最衷心的感谢啊！您讲的太好了，就是从中我学到了很多很多的知识。
谢谢，谢谢。
哪里？您讲的
老师我害怕。
不是这，您的确是老师啊！这个我真的很多东西要向您学习。
谢谢。
Gentlemen, I wish we had subtitles here, but we don't. So
okay,
I'm going to invite you to keep the rest of it in English.
Okay, so what I said, I really.
But that was good.
Thank you very much to my teacher. Actually, it's my teacher, Mr. Dharan, because I learned a lot from Mr. Sridharan about the translation. So really, I'm not just praising anything. Okay, about the translation we had done before is really very, very difficult because there is no dictionary from Chinese to Tamil or Tamil to Chinese. Only have English to Tamil. That is available. But I learned from A, I, U, A, I. This I learned from this because I learned all Chinese school, not Tamil school. So I learned from. My mother is a teacher, of course. I can learn from all, but very officially textbooks. All official textbooks. Then we learn through the translation. Of course, my mother will polish all the translations from very, very simple words until we have done some Mao Zedong's works. At that time, in Tamil, only available translation book is Mao Zedong's quotation and Mao Zedong's military works. This in Tamil, but that Tamil is Sri Lankan Tamil because translated by Sri Lankan experts from English to Tamil. And what we have done is, because there is no dictionary, so any word we don't know, we get English, my mother will say it in Tamil, then we put into the works. And also we had to collect the words. So what we will do is, okay, the phrases, for example, Samba Shi Ganbu in Chinese, called 3-8 cadres. So what is 3-8 cadres? So we have to learn the history. We have to know why he called 3-8 cadres. So we learn the history. Then I wrote in a card, say 3-8 cadres translate to Tamil is da-da-da-da-da-da. That is Japani எதிர்ப்பு யுத்தத்தில் ஈடுபட்ட ஊழியர்கள். Then people will understand what that means. But we cannot say 3-8 cadres. This is one. So we collect the word. At that time, no computers, all typewriters and typing, Tamil typewriters, typing, and all use hand. We write, then type. So the word, the collection of the word is very challenging. Is very challenging. Then we collected a lot of words, really, but I lost it all. I don't know where. Otherwise, I can do some translation. This is one thing. Secondly, Mr. Sridharan said, very important thing is, we cannot do word-to-word translation. You won't understand it. Yeah, because Lu Xun is a word-to-word translator. He translated some Russian novel to Chinese. I read it, I cannot understand what he's talking to tell us. So not word. So what we will understand one paragraph, the meaning, then translate the meaning, but not running away. And we have other people to check whether our translation is correct or not. So, but it's really challenging during that time. And but the language, as teacher said, you had to always follow up. Then after 1981, I didn't work in the language sector. So then after 20 years, somebody asked me to translate some articles from Chinese to Tamil. I really suffered because you had to follow up the language. Yeah, the language is developing every day. So every Tamil language has changed so much. If you don't follow up, you don't know how to make it. That's how to translate. So I suffered a lot. Finally, I translated. Then I asked the Tamil people in Malaysia, can you understand what I wrote there? They say, yes, I can understand. We can understand, but the language you are using is very old. so, so, that's why when I heard Mr. Sridharan's presentation, I feel it's a modern Tamil. It's a modern Tamil. And of course, Mr. Sridharan is deep in the Tamil literature. I'm not. So I have to learn a lot. At that time, we had read some Tamil novels and we wrote down the good phrases and we tried to use in our translation. So like this kind of learning, what I faced, that's why I said, I really like to listen to Mrs. Sridharan's presentation and about the translation. I have not done it. It's really a pioneer job and really we have to appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma, and of course, Dharan. Both of you pioneers in your own right in translating from Chinese to Tamil in different genres. I see a comment by Shelley. Now, I just want to ask Shelley if she'd like to jump into the conversation. Shelley is a good friend and she's been translating Chinese works. And I would like to hear from you, Shelley, of your thoughts about translations in general and translating from the Chinese in particular. Shelley, may I invite you?
Thank you. I don't know that I have much to add other than to say I really admire what you've done. That's so impressive to hear about this work going from Mandarin to Tamil, and that you're pioneering this work. I think that's something that's very different from anything I've done. Usually, I'm working between Mandarin and English, and there's so much translation already out there between these two languages, going both directions. So it's really just. I'm trying actually to still wrap my head around the idea of being the very first person doing something like this. That's really amazing. So I just would like to say I really appreciate that you've done that. I mean, I think it's important for all of us, really.
Thank you, Shelley. I think that besides translations, Shelley does a lot of work through her organization, Dharan and Ravi, in encouraging and building capabilities and resources for translators. But I have a question for you while we're waiting for other questions to come in. Ravi and Dharan, essentially both of you, first it was Ezra Pound and then it was Lucian. So two big guys who got knocked today. Essentially bad translations. Bad translations. Now, how can the non-academic reader ensure that the translation that she is reading is accurate? It may be an unfair question, but I think for the rest of us who just go to a bookshop and buy a translation, what help is there? Dharan, can I ask for your thoughts on this first?
Okay, see, I'm a person who goes even before. When I say what is the meaning of this word, and if somebody says this is the meaning, and my second question is where did you see? How do you know this meaning? And they say I checked in the dictionary. I go into the meaning of a word in a very deeper way, right? So I don't take it as dictionary is dictionary. As I said, I have a separate facet of lexicography into it. I haven't spoken much about it. So meaning of the word is a fascinating thing for me. Okay, from that perspective, I would feel that it's almost like somebody who cannot see is guided by you. You are actually holding their hand and you're taking there. So they are trusting you. They are coming there, and you have to go extra mile to do. When a mistake happens, it can happen in many ways. See, there is again, in a Chinese context, there is a book by Pallavi Iyer. I think it's Thirai Vilagum Samayam. When they are, I think the curtain, I'm forgetting the English word, but the Tamil translation. She wrote it in English, and then it was been translated into Tamil. Now she's describing a moment where she gets into a taxi, and the taxi driver is, she wanted to say something, and she goes to the air, uh, she has to go to the airport, and so she tries to do a flight, but the driver thinks that she's talking of a bird and chicken, so he takes her to Kentucky Fried Chicken shop. It's a very hilarious situation. She describes in a book. She lived in China. When I was in the embassy, she was living there. So we have met in the, she was a journalist and I was a media officer. So we used to meet. And she has written about her life in Beijing and what happened. And that there is a phrase. This book has been brought in by Kirakku Padipagam in Tamil. And the translator says, he uses the word avan for taxi driver. And in the book, it just says he. In English, he is more respect and equal. But the translator consciously has made, because, taxi driver. So this is a translator's attitude towards taxi driver. So he makes him lesser than the storyteller. This sociological shift is coming from the translator. It is not a problem of English language. Reader will think that she thinks that the taxi driver is Avan, he is lower than her. So as a translator, as I said, it's a huge responsibility. If you are asking from the reader's perspective, no, you are going there blind-eyed. That's why I said that somebody is leading him. There is no way you will know that it is. I have a few clues, but I don't have a very solid theory behind it. So I'm going to stop here by saying that it is more a message for the translators that somebody is trusting you. Don't goof up. Somebody is trusting you, not you as a creator, but as a translator. You're a bridge. Don't goof it up. Right? Try to bring as much as possible with faithful work. Okay, that loyalty, that faithfulness is a very important thing, apart from the literary qualities of the translation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dharan. I think it's true. We tend to be very blind, and there's been a great debate going on for a long time that I've known whether we are really reading Murakami or we're reading somebody else. But I will leave that controversy for some other time. I think there are a couple of comments that come in through the chat, and I would like to sort of pick out KF's point. Where he heard an Italian translator translating Chinese into Italian. I'm sorry I can't read the Mandarin, but maybe, Dharan, would you like to comment on that comment? And
what is that?
If you look at the chat, there is a comment from KF.
Yeah.
KF, Italian translated in Chinese into Italian. Someone used the word as a story, and he said that nearly cried when he had to translate that. Then he had to add a long footnote to explain what is story within a story. Okay, I haven't heard of this story, but see, this is something that I touched in my speech also, that my selection was very conscious, that I didn't really want to go into poem work intake. There will be huge historical element behind it. Right? That is true for Tamil also. Okay, when you try to take something from Tamil and you take it to this side, then you have to explain a lot to bring it here. Okay, these are really not very, at least at the pioneering level, we should not be trying these things. Okay, and very famous, just to comment to KF, there is a very famous online somewhere. It's there in my book at the annex. I've given the address also. If you get hold of this, or I'll try to give this. in the bibliography I've given this, there is one poem. What is that? The Moon Seen by Chang or something. There is a particular poem where poet is looking at the moon. Okay, it's about 4 to 8 lines poem. Over the centuries, many people have translated that Chinese poem into English. If you read 2 of the translations, in many times you will not even know that they are the translation of the same Chinese poem. Okay, it's a very hilarious situation where each translation stands on its own, and the translated words don't even relate to each other. Okay, and I have had some moments in translating Shichin into this. For example, there is a song which I've actually translated. It talks about the farmer's life. Farmer's life, how simple, how meaningful, and how integral it is to the humanity. Farmer's life that is why Thiruvalluvar says that whatever you are behind a farmer. Okay, I don't want to get into Tamil here. I'm very irresistibly, but this is what he says: whoever you are actually following behind a farmer. Right? This is Tirukkural. This Chinese poem captures in Shichin. It says that ஒவ்வொரு விதையிலும் வாழ்வின் ஈரம். Each seed has the moisture of life. Each seed captures the moisture of life. When I read that line, okay, there's so many Tamil poems from Shangam literature. I can bring it here. I actually started writing something about as a sort of connector to say that this line captures these feelings. There is a Purananuru poem, and there are so many poems which can go into each seed captures life's moisture. In fact, this book is now in English roughly translates to, even if I adorn, there's nobody to behold. Even if I dress up all the things, my lover is not there to look at me. Right? This is capturing a feeling of women. It says that even if I all dressed up, there is nobody to look at me. Originally, the title was Over Vidayil Varvin Year. In each seed, there is a moisture of life. I am so intrigued by that single line. I love it. In case I do another version, an expanded version, still I will have that thought in me that probably I should put that word as that. So each of these lines, as KF has said, when you know what the single line captures, and then when you're trying to bring here, you are missing a lot. That is probably what he's meaning. And if you see in my slide also I showed, I connected to a feeling of a child. I say a small child is standing on the side of a rivulet, and the rivulet water is rushing and gurgling and going, and the child is trying to take the water and then pour it into a pot. Right? A child's hand is it's not dexterous, right? The child is very small hands, and it's not very deft also. So the child is trying to carry, and the child sees how the water is oozing out throughout. And I feel that each translator is like a child. You know what you are carrying. You know how the river is. You are trying to bring a small portion of the river into your pond or your pot, and you are to take it to somewhere else. And as a translator, you know how much is missing. And that is the exact feeling that he is capturing there. Thank you, KF, for this. Really.
Thank you, Dharan. You've got 2 more questions. I'm going to give you some time to look at the chat box for you, Dharan. But I'm just going to go quickly to Ravi. Ravi, the news cycle in a radio station is very quick. You've got to prepare, I suppose, news bulletins and all. How did you deal with difficult phrases like this, where it's virtually untranslatable, or you need to transform it into a long paragraph or many paragraphs before you can translate it? What was your experience, Ravi?
For example, in Chinese language, they like to use a lot of phrases, 2 words, 4 words. But when especially in the news or maybe in the commentary, But when we translate to other language or Tamil language, if you translate both, the same meaning actually. So we will only translate one. So otherwise, when you listen to that kind of language, yeah, it's not a literature, so it's not very strict. So the main thing is we want people listen and understand. So to listen to understand, we have to make it simple. So not like literature you can read you can slowly understand, but listen you cannot slowly understand. You have to listen and understand immediately. So that is a small difference. So we usually use the simple words to describe the difficult meanings. So that is according to our understanding, but it doesn't mean it is 100% accurate or 100% correct. But so what we will do is, in order to make sure it is correct, so after we translate to Tamil, then my mother will translate the Tamil to English, and one English, Chinese English, both very talented writer will decide whether it is correct or not. So it is a long process. So sometimes after we translate the article to get the translate to get approval was taking a long time. Then after the translate everything, and finally we could do it. So after some years experience, so the translation is accurate or not, we can decide. So main thing is for radio, especially for news, must be simple, not use very difficult languages, difficult words, and some Chinese phrases. We will make some, for example, 压迫. 压迫 is how do I say? அடக்குமுறை.
KFC is oppress. Someone oppressed.
Oppress. Chinese we like to use some adjective like 残酷的, 无情的, this kind of thing. So 残酷的 means cruel, inhuman. So we don't need to use so many. We say, oh, cruel oppress, enough for us. And use very simple word to understand it. That is the main thing in translation.
How interesting. So I wonder if you translate from Tamil to Mandarin, whether you need to add those words to make it intelligible.
Yes, I think it's needed. Sometimes when you translate back to Chinese, you have to add some words to make Chinese people to understand it. Otherwise they cannot understand.
Perfect. That's
absolutely
fascinating.
I used to say that when I learn Chinese language, and when you get 99 out of 100, your teacher will say "utso," which is like not bad, right? So that's a maximum you're going to get from your teacher in a Chinese class. When you get 99 out of 100, you say "utso." Right? He will not say how, how, how. No, putso, right? But when you translate it to your people, say my wife was there at the time, I cannot tell her that he said not bad. I said, okay, he said very good.
Dharan, I just want to tell you that my father was not a Chinese teacher, but no matter what I did, it was okay, fine, not bad. He never said good, so I think he must have some.
I think Abhilash is capturing it. Also, is sort of acceptable for a while, right? Okay, I saw two questions quickly. One is Abhilash is asking, when I was in the embassy, I worked in Beijing in late 90s, and then I moved to Hong Kong early 2000, 2003 or so. I went to Delhi. And then again, I went to Beijing. By 2004, I was in Beijing. And before Olympics, I went out to Pacific and then Delhi, US. And in recently, 2016 to 20, I was in Taipei. So it's been, as I said, my CFL compulsory foreign language is Chinese. So I keep rotating here. And also there is another question by TMG. He says, Chingsai Fenxiao. He says in Chinese, he's written a very kind praise for me. And he's asking, or he or she, I'm assuming here, I don't know the gender, that TMG is asking, have you ever translated any Tamil literary masterpieces into Mandarin? This is a very good question, which is haunting me over the 2 decades. One is, there is not many people who can actually do Tamil to Chinese, precisely for the same reason many people who can do from Chinese to Tamil. Your Tamil has to be very good to bring into Tamil. Your Chinese has to be very good to bring into Chinese. Your original language, the originating language, can be slightly patchy. In my case, Chinese is patchy. It's still okay. But when it is landing, it has to land very strong. So I've translated English poems. I've translated other language poems via English. I've translated Chinese poems, not only Shrichi, other poems also translated. And these things can land into Tamil because my poetic sense in Tamil, my literary exposure in Tamil is fairly okay. But I cannot claim the same in my Chinese area. My reading in Chinese is very bad, and I cannot approach it in a very in a comfortable way. Once I understand, once I crack it, I can appreciate. Then I can bring it into Tamil. But if I have to take something from Tamil and go, and especially, I'm a very greedy guy, and I touched Shriching, which even a normal modern Chinese will not touch. This is a fact. A normal Chinese literary student will not try to reinterpret Shriching. And I'm such a patchy guy, but I've taken Shriching and I brought it to Tamil. So somebody as ambitious as that have to try this. Okay, they have to take something, and their Chinese language approach should be very good, and then they can take it back, and it could be slightly patchy. I will share one information here for all the people. Recently, at least a few years ago, there was an attempt to translate Tirukkural into Chinese language.
Yes.
At the time, Singapore also featured. It was almost like a farcical comedy for me. Everybody was looking at me, right? From the beginning, everybody was looking at me. From the beginning, word go, I said, no, I cannot do this. For the same reason, I explained that my Chinese is very bad. I read Tirukkural very seriously. I have probably 5-6 editions of Tirukkural, including Parimela explanation to Parimela Kivaja is my favorite book. So all those things, I'm very well versed with Tirukkural, and I've spoken about Tirukkural, but my Chinese language is not good enough to take it. So I said no to Tamil Nadu government, and then some Tamil University people came. I said, no, I cannot do this. And then they went to Singapore. I think you were Jayanti Shankar, somebody, she pointed out to me. I said, no, I cannot do. And then at the time, A.R. Venkatachalapati was teaching in a Chinese university, and somebody approached, teaching in Singapore University. Somebody approached him, and then he came to me. So I kept saying, no, I don't do, I cannot do. Finally, when I was in US, by the time I've left Beijing, and I was in US or something, at the time, again, Tamil Nadu government team approached me saying that, okay, we have now identified 4 or 5 people who are willing to translate, but we don't know how to select. Can you help me? I said, yeah, here I can come. So I said, you don't send me the who translated it. Okay, give the same chapter, 1 or 2 chapters to all the people. Let them translate 1 or 2 chapters, and then send only the translations to me. I will go through, I will say which is a good translation, and then you people can decide what it is. Right? So in that way, I helped Tamil literature coming into Chinese, but I have not directly done that. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly. Yes, please. Ravi.
Can I share one small
Sure,
information?
Please.
Actually, in the Radio International, there is a Tamil professor called Sun Guoqiang.
Kodandai, Mr. Kodandai. Right?
Sun Guoqiang. Sun Guoqiang, his Tamil is very, very powerful, and Chinese, of course. So he was doing the translation of Tirukkural to Chinese. unfortunately, before he finished the work, he passed away. My mother likes him so much and so much.
Ravi, அவரோட தமிழ் பேரு குழந்தை தானே. Was he not called
Sundaram? Sundaram.
Sundaram. Sundaram. I met
Sundaram.
Sundaram குழந்தை both.
So my mother, I give him one Tamil name is Sundaram. Sun, also Sun Sungwaja. So this from here. And secondly, this Radio International has published Chinese Tamil dictionary. I think 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, that's
Sun Guoqiang is my mother's student.
Oh, really? Oh, my God.
Yeah, the first group of student. That is my brother. My brother from Beijing speaking.
Oh, really? Okay. I worked with Sundaram and there's Kurandai and Ishwari, Arvind.
Oh, yeah.
I worked with them.
Right.
This has been
Kurandai is the leader now in Tamil.
Oh, he's the leader? Okay.
Now, yeah. Present.
Very good. Devi was there, and there was a lady also, I'm forgetting her name. Saraswati.
Yeah, it's all. It's a new. Yeah, she is. I think Saraswati is in Beijing language institution now.
Okay.
They shift out the Tamil teaching from the Beijing Broadcasting Institution to Beijing Language and Foreign Studies University.
Okay.
so much wisdom in this conversation, and it's really fascinating. It's really interesting to hear about all the work that both people on both sides in China as well as in India are doing in facilitating translations in many different fields. I think in the news as well as in the literary milieu, we are fortunate indeed. It of course brings to focus the role that Singapore can play. I think we are fortunate to be at the crossroads, not just in terms of geography, but also culturally and linguistically, where there's lots of interaction between Tamil, Chinese, and Malay, and as well as many other languages. I think we're growing in the number of people who speak different languages in Singapore. So, and I think that I'd like to just say that personally, I've taken away something that Dharan has said, which is the fact that he's a big proponent of using the internet as a means of sharpening translations, not by using Google Translate necessarily, but by building a community of people who can sharpen your translations. And I think that despite all the technology, something that I take away from Mr. Ravi Sharma's talk is the need to painstakingly collect good ways of translating, good phrases that you translate, and sort of build a database of this, so that, and to test it against your audience, Mr. Sharma, because at the end of the day, something that you said which is important is whatever you translate must make sense to the people who are either listening or reading to it. So, gentlemen, this has been a greatly useful talk, I think, for all of us who have been fortunate to listen to you. And I'd like to thank all our participants who contributed in many different ways, throwing in translations while we were having a talk. And this is fascinating. I think this is something that we'd like to thank both the Center for Singapore Tamil Culture as well as their supporters, the NLB, the National Library Board, and the National Arts Council. And at this moment, I'd like to invite Renu from the National Library Board, who will be sharing with us on the resources that are available in the NLB on pertinent to Payani Dharan's speech. So thank you to Dharan for giving us these suggestions, and Renu, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sitaraj. Very good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining with us today. After hearing from our speakers today, many of us may be interested in titles which are relevant to today's topic on translating literature. On that note, NLB brings to you some recommended titles which you may be interested to pick up in our libraries. These are mostly found in the adult lending and the reference sections. So this will show books in English and Chinese languages. Do take some time to look through them. Here they are. Thank you. So we will be posting these recommended reads in our Facebook page as well, so that our patrons can have a better view on these titles. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Renu, and
Thank you.
quite a collection there for anyone who's in Singapore to avail of in our National Library's branches. And the final bit of today, thank you for joining us. I think you'll agree with me that there is a lot of space and opportunity for us to discuss translations between different languages, especially as we are in Singapore. And thanks for making this possibility by being here. The organizers, the Center for Singapore Tamil Culture, would like to get your feedback so that we can sharpen the programs as they go on. So there's going to be a QR code, I believe, that's going to be flashed. Please do consider leaving your feedback. And we hope to see you in future programs. It's a long weekend, and I wish you all a pleasant long weekend. Stay safe, stay well. Thank you.